And now it's preparing to be live streamed.
Okay.
And it takes it about a minute to come up. Don't know why.
It says on my screen it's now streaming live.
Yep. I'm getting that bit. Oh, and now guess what? It is.
Okay.
So I'm going to mute, and then I will make you the host. Yep. Okay, I'm muting my YouTube so that you're not getting me twice. And I am making you the host.
Got it.
You are now the host. And please remember at 11 o'clock to end the YouTube so that we can go ahead and start the main service. We actually start streaming about 11:05.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good to know. We usually run the Zoom recording just a little bit long to give them editing time. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
An extra minute or so or two is fine, but yep.
Okay.
Okay. Then I'm gonna leave and get set up for the service.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Sure. Bye-bye.
All right. I think we're pretty well set here now, right? We're good.
I think so.
Okay,
I
all right.
think I've got what I need, and you're coming in clear and not freezing. And Stacy's been working on hers behind the scenes, and I think she's good to go. And so, yeah, I think we're doing pretty well right now.
All right.
Stacy, is this the screen you're going to primarily be using, like for yourself when yours?
This one is me, and the
Yeah.
picture, the one with my picture is the one that I have my PowerPoint on.
All right. I like to spotlight the speaker and, make sure that they're big and everyone can see them.
Oh boy.
I may have to flip around a little bit. We'll see. We'll see how that gets changed when you share your screen. It may just resolve itself.
Let me do it real quick just so you can see if you need to. Where's my screen?
Okay. Oh yeah, it did. It totally just took over. So that's perfect.
Is that okay?
So I'll leave this other one, the one with you with the bookcases behind you, as a spotlighted screen. And then when you share your screens, that will just fill up the screen for us. So yay.
Hey, I wonder why. Let me see. Why did it not? That's odd. So there's my screen.
Looks good
Okay,
to me. Yeah.
Okay, it's something I thought it didn't advance, but I think it's okay. Okay.
All right. Put Joe
It's so
on
funny.
there.
I talked to a couple of people that knew about today. Someone got, I guess, a notice about it and said, "Hey, I saw that you were going to be there." And then my friend Cheryl Kimmy, I think, is going to be on here because she's going to be presenting, I think, to this group next.
Right,
so-
Craig and I,
Oh.
exactly. Craig and I
Cheryl
talked
Kimmy's
to
our-
her, yes, yesterday during our practice run, and yeah,
Yeah,
it
I'll
was
be
very
promoting
fun.
it.
yeah, I'm on her fringe board, and she did say, "Guess what just happened?" It's like, what? She said, whoever it was it Craig? Said, "Oh, you won't know her, who she is," but Stacy Johnson Cosby said, "Oh yeah, she's on my board," and so I am indeed.
Mhm.
So he's maybe in the hallway. Okay, got to make sure the dog is secured. My husband's getting the dog out of the space. Oh, let me make sure.
Yeah. So any other questions or anything? Are we? Are we doing the
No.
video today? Are you just doing the as far as the collection part?
Well, that's a question for Mika and Mark, who don't actually seem to be on the call anymore. So
Should we just go ahead and can you just do it? We'll just do it the old way again, or for
I
now, or
think we should plan on that because I don't have that video to show. It's not anything that came from me. Good question. Good question.
So we will just do it'll be in the chat. We want support for this service, for this program. And
Although I should talk to them about not just that video, but normally they stay on, like, if we're in person, they're there doing the sound and all of that. And like, they're engaged in the whole length of the forum in case something goes wrong.
mm-hmm.
So it feels a little intimidating to me that I'm solely responsible for those things today, because that's out of my skill set. About the best I could do would close the call and reopen it. That's it. So interesting. Yeah, we've just gotta, figure things out as we go along, right?
Yeah, we're still pretty new, Stacy, doing the hybrid where we got a lot of the staff now in person for the regular church service, and we're also doing still doing Zoom on something like this, and so it's a little tricky. But
I'm just appreciative that we even have this technology available. So
yeah.
with all the bumps that we get with it, I'll take them because we'll eventually work them out. So not a problem at all.
Yeah, and then thank you for your work on this. You're obviously very confident that you know what you're doing, which helps on our end.
We'll see.
Right, that's right. I guess.
Let's see. It's the same link that you sent me, the one that would be shared with others to look at it. Same link.
Yeah. And it's the same link that people get from the webpage, the main webpage of All Souls. It says the forum link. We get it off of there. So.
Okay. Very good. Just checking. Will we do a countdown? Is that how it starts?
Oh, I think we just kind of roll into it. I'll do when we said we're ready, I guess it is about time to go here. It looks like it's about 10. And, I will talk about what we're doing, who we are, what we're doing here. And I'll just give you a brief introduction and let you just take it from there. So,
okay.
And so Renee, are we good? Should we start now? Are we ready? We're recording? All right. Yeah, I guess 3, 2, 1. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the All Souls Community Forum, coming to you via Zoom from All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Kansas City. I'm Joe Robertson, and I'm a member of this church, and I'm a member of the Forum Committee, which for decades, this forum has carried on important conversations, promoting critical thinking on our most compelling and challenging issues of our day. And today we're going to be talking about the housing crisis in America and across Kansas City and the region. And our guest is Stacey Johnson Cosby. Welcome, Stacey. She's a realtor with Reese Nichols and the president of the Kansas City Regional Housing Alliance. So good morning, Stacey.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Am I ready to go? Or
Stacey, you take it away. You tell us what's on your mind. Tell us what everyone needs to know.
Very good. And so this is a topic that I am talking about everywhere, the housing crisis. As you said, Joe, I've been a real estate agent. I'm licensed. I've been licensed for 34 years. So I sell housing. I'm licensed in Missouri and Kansas. And I'm also a housing creator. And that means I'm a landlord. We use the word that's more aptly describes what we do. I create housing. So I'm a housing provider and a housing creator. And along those lines, I started an organization, an alliance of several of my peers, I think about 3 years ago, in response to something that we saw happening at City Hall. When there's an issue and the city's going to talk about an ordinance or get public testimony, that usually brings people out, neighborhoods and other business types when something's going on. So in this particular time, about 3 years ago, you all may remember there was an issue with inspections, rental inspections. And so they were calling it healthy homes. And I looked at all of the people going down to testify, and they were all related to my industry, and all of us provide rental housing. So they were property managers and landlords and realtors. And so what I saw with that is an opportunity for us to get together. Instead of just coming out during a crisis, I wanted us to all get together. And so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to give you an idea of some of the organizations that are part of my alliance. So there's my information. So the KC Regional Housing Alliance is that organization, and we represent housing providers that we have the leaders. We're kind of a group of groups. And so the leaders of property management group, of investor groups, realtor groups, landlord groups are all at our table. My goal is to pull us together to speak with one voice for our industry, because that didn't happen before. You never hear from those of us who provide housing. And so that's who we are. And we represent over 100,000 rental units with the memberships of our organization. So we are a big, strong, and powerful group with information that we want to share. We have a goal of not only creating housing, but preserving the housing that we have. And that's a big deal. And that is our core business goal. And a lot of people don't look at us. When you think of like landlords, you don't think of a business person. I am a small business person. My husband and I, we have a small business, and our business is providing housing. And so we have 21 rental units. Our average rent is about $600 per month, which is very affordable. And so we've been housing providers for a little over 25 years. And a lot of my peers in our industry and in my alliance have been around for a long time. Some of them with, a couple properties, and some of them with multi-family units, apartment complexes. And so we run the gamut. We are representative of our industry, and it's important for us to have a voice because it's needed at a time where we don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have enough housing in general, but in particular, affordable housing. We felt that there needs to be someone in the industry speaking up, instead of us simply just hearing from people on a staff and for a city government that doesn't know housing like us, or people that may rent the housing. That don't know housing like we know it. So we are in business. This is our area of expertise. And our goal is always to share what we know for the betterment of the industry. It helps our business, of course, but it also helps our industry. And why is property ownership important? It's important because we know when people actually own homes, it's a gateway to the middle class and beyond, and a way of creating wealth. And so owning property can help someone go from poverty to wealth or financial independence. And we know that is true. There's no question about that. So property ownership is important, whether you own the home you're in only, or if you own multiple properties as a business and you provide housing to multiple people. And so for me, what I want to say is private property rights are important. And at this particular time, they're in danger. And so we're going to get into that a little bit too. So we all know real estate's the American dream. It's something that you pass along to your children and your heirs. It's I look at a house like as a piggy bank. You build equity in your home. And especially during this time that we're in now, where maybe 2 or 3 years ago, your house was worth one amount and now it's worth so much more because of the shortage. I'll give a real quick story here. I have a niece that purchased a house 3 years ago, and she paid 120 something for it. It's right now under contract for 180 something. And so that the equity is real, that she's going to make a lot of money as a result of owning a home. And she just turned, I think, 32. And so where else, what other investment is that safe where you can make money and preserve it and keep it? And that's how a lot of people send their kids to school. You take a dream vacation around the world, you buy other real estate, you buy a car, you pay off debt, or you just have money. Your equity is important. So property ownership is important. And protecting and preserving the private property rights, to me, is very important. It's critical. And so some people don't look at it as deeply as I do. And I look at it that deeply because I have to, because it's my business and it's a personal mission of mine as a real estate agent that more people own housing. And so along those lines, I have just a quick question. I want to ask, if it's okay to ask those who are on the call, how many of you actually, let me see if there's a way I can see everyone. How many of you, if you can raise your hand, actually own property, your own home? And then I'm going to ask how many of you own investment property. So how many of you own property? Okay. And then I see a couple hands there. How many of you own investment property? And so hands are still up. Okay, so I'm speaking to the crowd then. So what I'm saying to you all is we want to be able to keep and preserve that right. And so I want to ask something else too. And I know the format may change sometimes, but I talked to Joe and Renee about this. What I'd like is if there's something that I'm talking about that you want me to stop and answer or clarify, can you please let me know? And I'm happy to do that. So if you have a question, type in chat, or Joe or Renee, let me know if anyone, can jump in with a question, because I'd rather answer the question as I'm talking about it than have someone hold it in their brain as a distraction, because I'm going to be talking about a few different scenarios. Is that okay?
I think the easiest way might be if I could watch chat. If people have questions, if you could just write them in the chat, then I will keep an eye on that.
Okay, that's great. So thank you for that. I just want to make sure that I can address questions as they come up and not get too far along. Okay, so the American dream real estate. So to me, it's very important that we keep it. Let's see if I can get to my next slide. Okay, and so the impact. So I am concerned now about the impact of the economic shutdown and what it's done to our housing market. And it is something that concerns those of us who own properties as our primary home and shelter, and those who own it as investment. And so at 3 different levels, like policies make a difference. At the federal level, the eviction moratorium is, to me, one of the most drastic changes in a negative way on private property rights in our country that I've seen in my 30-something years in the business. And it is, to me, it's something that can be damaging, and we need to stop the damage. And you're going to hear me talk a little bit about that. And at state level, an example is rent control. You'll see different states or cities trying to implement rent control to protect renters. And so, and it's like, how do you protect me against my customer? No one needs a renter more than a landlord or a housing provider. So I don't need someone to protect the renter. And so that is put in place, and it's going to have unintended consequences. For example, luckily for us in Missouri, we don't have rent control. It's preemptive, and there's no way that government at the local level or the state level can cap the profits that my business makes. And that's how you have to look at rent control. And a lot of people think, oh, that's great. It's going to keep, tenants from having to pay too much in rent. It'll control that. And these greedy landlords are asking too much. That's my world. I hear that all the time. And it's so wrong. It's so, to me, misguided, that conversation. What rent control is it said that if you have a property as the owner of the property, I must cap my profits. Now, what kind of business wants to go into business where government saying we're going to cap your profits? Can you imagine a restaurant going in and the government, the city or the state says, hey, you can only make a certain percentage just profit over your cost, or you can't raise your cost over a certain percentage, and having it government mandated? That is not healthy for any kind of business to have government step in and actually control profits. And so what they are, there's a lot of talk out there, and you'll hear the mantra, people over profits. And I think that's well and good. It sounds good until you start thinking about what they're saying. What they call profits, I call income, and it's how I feed my family. And so, and that profit also covers the mortgage payment. It covers the property taxes and the repairs and the maintenance. And so they took something that should be a straightforward business plan and turned it into a social justice issue, and said that you can't, the landlords are greedy and the poor tenants can't afford to pay more. When a lot of that I will challenge and say is simply not right. It's not accurate. And so rent control is a problem. And where you see rent control across the country, you'll see landlords exiting the business because they're going to go where they can maximize their profit. We could be in the stock market, but we're not. We're in real estate. We chose to invest our money in real estate because it was relatively safe and we could earn a decent profit, or whatever profit the market will bear, that will take care of us, and more importantly, our heirs, our nieces and nephews. When we're gone, we can't take the property with us. And so we're building generational wealth, and we want something that's of value to pass along. And my husband retired 3 years ago from his job at the city. So for us, what we have is an important, we're replacing his income. And so you better believe we're going to fight to make sure that we're able to run our business in a profitable way. And then at the local level, bad policies, or you're hearing under renters' rights or tenant rights or tenant protections. And when you look at those, and we'll talk a little bit more about those, what you have to see is that movement when you add more rights, or when you try to create more rights for tenants, in this case, what's ultimately happening is you're taking them away from the person that owns the property. And so on the level, it says, yeah, they need more rights. And please know that there are rights that are already built in for all of us. They're there and they're built in. I mean, a lot of them are legal. And so you don't need more rights for one side or the other. And the sides are, how do I say this, kind of artificially kind of ginned up. There is no us versus them. There's no tenant versus the landlord versus the tenant, because we both must have each other. Without a tenant, I'm out of business. Without a housing provider, they're homeless. And so we need each other. We're two sides of the same coin, and we don't need any one side to be protected. There's a natural balance in power, and that I must provide a product that they want, or I'm going to be out of business. And so we need to look at it that way. And so bad policies on the housing market. So and I think the eviction moratorium just highlighted a lot of them, because it added even more trouble for us. And so the CDC Eviction Moratorium, and this is something that has just within, of course, the last year or so during the pandemic happened. When the government shut down the economy, what they said is that we need to protect renters. I don't know how they found out of everyone in our country, how they decided that renters were the ones that needed to be protected solely. And so they weren't worried about as strongly people who have mortgages, who actually own their properties and invested and purchased their properties. The overwhelming conversation, and you have to give it to the tenants organizations, they were successful and are successful in getting the word out, so much so that people haven't, the policymakers haven't stopped to think, hey, what about the people who hold mortgages? They may need help paying their mortgages. And the people who own the properties that the tenants are renting from, but the tenants, their voices were so loud and effective that they got extra rights for them. And so the CDC Eviction Moratorium is the government saying, hey, we're in a crisis and we need everyone to have, housing, to stay stable in your housing, especially if you're a renter. And even if you can't pay your rent, even we shut down the economy, you lost your job, and there are no jobs, your job is gone because we shut down the economy, that you can't pay your rent, but you're going to be guaranteed shelter. So you can stay there regardless of the fact that you can pay your rent or not. And so the tenants thinking like, hey, that's good. And people are thinking, okay, good for them. They're protected. What they didn't look at was someone like me on the other side of that owns the property, that uses that income to take care of the property and to pay my bills. And so we were left on the other side. So it had a negative impact on the housing industry in general. And we'll talk about that, the long-term unintended consequences. And it hurt me because if I was expecting a certain amount of rent each month to pay my business revenue in order to pay my bills, the government has just told me that not only do I not expect it, but there is nothing that I can do to enforce the contract that I signed. 2 citizens in this country signed a contract. We do this all the time. And the contract promises a couple of things. It promises, that I'm going to make sure that it's warm in the winter. I'm going to keep the heat going. I'm going to keep, health and safety standards in place. But it also has them promising to pay rent in exchange. So we have a contract. The government stepped on that contract and said, nope, you're not able to enforce your contract. And the end result in the housing industry, it forced me as a small business to give my product away for free. Can you imagine that? Imagine a restaurant or a grocery store during the pandemic when there's not enough food. People can't work, they can't buy food. Are they next where the government's going to now say, hey, grocery store, you're going to have to come in and you don't have to let people come in and get food free. It's an emergency. You have to do it. You better do it or else. Can you imagine, or any other business, if you own a clothing store, we need coats, you must let people get this free. Government stepped into my small business and on my contract, and that has a chilling effect across our industry. So people who thought owning a property meant that you got to control it, within the laws that are in place, now got a rude wake-up call that said, no, government owns the property. And we call that a taking. The government has actually taken my property and is controlling my property. Can you believe that has happened in this country? I can't believe it to this day. And even though the federal eviction moratorium has been lifted, because remember, the president said, I know it's unconstitutional, but we're going to do it anyway. The Supreme Court finally came back out and made a ruling that it was unconstitutional and that it must stop. So at a federal level, thank goodness, after months of being penalized, it stopped. But on the local levels across the country, it's still in place. It's still in places like New York. I was in a meeting in Los Angeles via Zoom, and there it's absolutely horrible there. I would not own property if I could afford it, even in California. The owner of the property is restricted in so many ways. And during this time, and the reason that this is going to have a long-term impact is we're exiting the business. My peers are getting out because we already have the local property issues with policy. And I mentioned a couple of them here. Each time we have new policies locally, we lose people. And so that we talked about the inspection, the Healthy Home Rental Inspection Program. When that came about, a lot of people left the business because they were over-regulating. Those regulations that protected tenants in the properties where you have nobody wants a slumlord in business. We all want them out of business, but there were already laws in place that would protect them. The city just didn't have the will to enforce those ordinances. They were already there. And so what we ended up getting with the new Healthy Homes Rental Inspection Program is more layers of policy, rules, and regulations. And you know what people do? You run away from that. If you don't have to have all of them and you have other choices, you leave. And so we lost people when that came into place because those ordinances were already in place. The only difference is with them, they now added that we must pay. So it's not enough that we pay our taxes, our property taxes, which should cover basic services like enforcing those codes and the health departments. Now we have to pay again. And for the pleasure of providing housing, we must now pay the health department every year. So it adds to our costs. So we lost people then. And then we'll talk about the Tenants' Bill of Rights. We lost people then. And now, because there's more regulation, we can go to other cities and other places or invest in other things instead of investing in property. In this particular case, I'm talking about in Kansas City, Missouri. And so now the CDC Eviction Moratorium is the next layer, the third layer in the last few years that are causing people to leave. And it's government made. And it's hurting renters because what renters don't know, a lot of them during this time, is that you're going to pay what is due. You're going to be expected to pay. The government may have given you a ride. And we've had some housing providers that have not had rent for over a year, for over 12 months, they haven't had a penny in rent, and that tenant is still in the property. And you better believe that if it's a cold day and the heat's not working, that housing provider must go and get it on. And so it's an uneven way to do business, and people won't do it. We go where our capital is welcomed as investors. And when we see that it's not welcome, we'll go somewhere else. So the way it hurts renters is they're going to now owe all of the money during the moratorium that was due. So if you couldn't pay $600 or $700 per month, how in the world do they expect you to pay thousands of dollars when the moratorium is lifted? Because you know that the housing provider is going to do what they can to enforce their contract once the restraints are off. And so that means that they need to go to the court to evict the person. And remember, an eviction is simply removing someone from the property and getting a chance to go back and put someone in the property, that will appreciate it and be able to take care of it. And so 95% or so of the evictions that we hear about are for non-payment of rent. And so what we say is one of the easiest way to prevent an eviction is to pay the rent. And so that sounds harsh, but it is true. And so if a person's not able to pay the rent, let's find a way to help them pay it. And so one of the things I'm going to talk about before we finish are some of the solutions we have, because we don't just complain about things and point them out, but we come up with solutions as business people. We must. And so one thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to find out the impact of the CDC eviction moratorium that it's had on our market. And this is across the country. So that economic shutdown to close businesses impacts us, and it impacts our city and the housing in our city. And I think I've walked you through some of the things that show why it's unattractive to be a housing provider now. Because you can go somewhere else and spend your investment or your money somewhere else. And so we're going to lose those of us who are here who do this every day. We can run into as a small housing provider, we may run into our tenants in the grocery store. We see them around our community. But what's happening in our market is we have the investors who have the deep pockets, and a lot of them are corporate investors. They're from out of state. And if you're on either coast and you see those crazy high prices, and you come into our market, it's like these prices are a bargain. We have those investors coming into our market now. And so they're buying the properties and they're paying a good premium for them. And our people, instead of saying, I'm holding on to it for retirement, I'm holding on to it for my children, they're saying I'm out. And so we lose the small housing provider who is the neighbor, which is ideal. We lose that. And so I'm going to show you. So what we did in the beginning is we said, let's take a look at what is going on with people in this pandemic. And the chart on the left, it says, this was back in 2020. So maybe 6-7 months into the pandemic, we wanted to take the pulse of people. And we said, what percentage of your income relies on the your rental income? And the overwhelming majority will have, you'll see 36% is supplemental to another source. So it may not have been their primary source, but it's supplemental. And 30% said it's their primary source of income. So almost 60% of the people said that this income is important to us and critical. 34% said this is going to be my retirement income. I bought this as a retirement strategy, and this is how I'm going to pay my bills when I retire. All of that's in jeopardy. When you don't get a single penny because the government says you can't collect money, that's in jeopardy. And so then the other ones, we asked this back last year, how many of your, do you plan to sell your properties as a result of not being able to get income? You know, your business isn't producing. And so as you can see, almost 43% said yes. Directly because of the eviction moratorium and the fact they couldn't collect income, they're going to go out of business. And we don't need housing providers going out of business, especially local ones. And then we asked them at that time, do you plan to buy more rental housing within the next year? Because we need local owners. Over 75% said no. So that has a chilling impact on the market in that now those who are out looking for investment opportunities and creating housing in our own communities have been turned off. And the answer is no, we're not going to do it. Flash forward. Right now, this survey is open, so we don't have all the full results yet. And so this is just out right now. So we're asking people, have you sold your properties? And so you'll see so far, 22% have said yes. And so it's very real that they said they were going to do it. My guess is by the time we finish with the survey, we're going to find out that more have. And then of their renters right now that owe a past due amount because of the eviction moratorium, we asked the amounts. And so you'll see someone is owed $18,000, $125,000 past due rent outstanding. That may be someone with a lot of properties or a property manager. $60,000, someone has less than $2,000. Someone is owed $3,500. And I'll tell you, for my husband and I, we just got a check for $6,000 for one of our tenants with past due rent. And it took us 3 months to get it. And so now she's past due again because of the inefficiency of the government rental assistance. They didn't get it right. And so we asked people then if they have any previous renters that were evicted as a result of the pandemic that still owe them money. And we know that once we evict someone, chances are great that we're not going to ever see the money again. And so you hear people talking about eviction as a business model. Crazy. We lose money. Nobody wins with an eviction. The tenant doesn't, and we don't, because we know that if we evict someone that owes $7,000, they couldn't pay the rent, they're evicted because they couldn't pay the $7,000. Once they're gone, you will never see that. So as a housing provider, I will not be made whole because that person's gone. So we have 42% that have money outstanding that they may never collect, they may never get. And so some of the things that we're looking at in the tenants movement, I want to pause because I think I see a couple of things in the chat that I want to make sure I'm not missing anything there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you can see there, David had raised the question that you've just addressed about the institutional investors, buying up a lot of the property, yeah. And so I think you've addressed that one, of that concern. We have Craig is talking about the fact that there's not that much equity in a housing property in a home once you've had all the taxes and insurance and things on that. But let's see. And also, he had a question: what was the basis that the CDC was able to take the authority to stop evictions? And that was that one. So I'll just run through them here, and then you can address the ones as you want to. And then John has raised the question about the that that landlords that the Kansas did receive 14.8 million for landlords. You can address that if what happened there, and they did not have to provide free housing during the entire crisis. And say mentioned that Missouri received at least 324 million for rent. And I know that's a process. I know that's a difficult process. The rent relief, I've been involved in that. I know that's difficult to getting that money out. And then, there was talk about the need to have have other voices on here, and we have had that. I will point out that we did have KC Tenants on here in the spring. So, and Tara Rugavir is here. So, we open for the questions here. So those are some of the questions we have at the moment.
Okay, so I will address the authority that the CDC took was a public health. Because of the pandemic. They didn't want people to move. So if someone, they simply wanted to keep people in place. And they said that, the way to stay, to keep the virus from spreading is for people to stay sheltered. And so keeping in mind, though, that the next part of that is that people lost their jobs. And so when you lose your job and you need to keep your housing, you need to be able to find a way to pay your rent. And so the rental assistance wasn't readily available. And so I contend that what they should have done, understanding if they want people to stay in place, the moment they shut down the economy and the moment we knew that people were going to lose their jobs, but we wanted them to stay sheltered, they should have immediately made rental assistance available. Then you don't need the heavy hand of the eviction moratorium. You don't need a law to say, hey, you cannot kick anyone out for non-payment of rent. They should have immediately made rental assistance available day one. And so if your goal is to keep Mary housed, then make sure Mary has money to pay her rent and her other bills, and she had food on the table. And so the eviction moratorium was short-sighted in that it tried to legislate with a sledgehammer and just said, you better house them free, Stacey. So there's no other balance to that. That is what happened. And then tenants were expected to be living in my property rent-free. Luckily for my husband and I, we had some tenants that were impacted, as I mentioned earlier, because of job losses or reduction in income. They were all honorable people, and that they wanted to pay their rent, and they knew that it was due, and that they would apply for the rental assistance when it became available. So we were very lucky in that. But the problem is that not every tenant is that way. And I can tell you on my Monday morning meetings with my peers, there are some tenants that took advantage. They would go out literally, and you hear the stories. I'm saying this is true from firsthand stories. They would go out, they'd buy new cars, they're going on vacation. We knew they were working, but they weren't paying rent. I had an older lady, she happened to be an older Black lady who was retired, and she had a rental house. This was her income. And she had a tenant that moved in because of, you mentioned KC Tenants and some of those, cancel rent. They went on a rent strike. They were telling people, do not pay your rent, and you don't have to pay your rent. We need to cancel rent. Rent should not be due. Housing is a right. So these tenants heard that. In addition to the eviction moratorium, all of these mixed messages, and these tenants took advantage. She said, you need to pay your rent. They said, we don't have to. And I said to her, I said, it must be because they lost jobs. She said, no, they just started working at Cerner. So they had a job, but all of the messaging around this told them that they didn't have to pay their rent. So some people took advantage of it. And I had a property manager that said when the stimulus checks came out, people were, that she saw in the trash of the apartment building, big screen TVs. It's real. It sounds bad to say, but it is real. That's what people are saying. And that's what was happening. And so there's no, and I wouldn't mind if you wanted me on with KC Tenants. I don't have a problem. We've been on together before. But what you have to know is that they're not necessarily representative of the typical tenant. They're a movement that has that housing policy goals. So they're not necessarily interested in the average everyday tenant and their plight. And I'm saying this not to be controversial, but I'm in this market. I see this. I'm here. And I know them, I know my tenants, and I'm seeing what's happening. Their goals are bigger, and their goals are to change policies. My goals are to keep people in their housing today. They may not have a way to pay the rent. And my business depends on people being able to pay their rent. And people want to do what's right. They want to pay their rent. They're not all about a social movement. And so again, there's no us versus them, no balance in the conversation. The market is naturally balanced, and that I need the tenant as much as they need me. So I'm not going to do something that's harmful to my tenant, my customer. I don't need a group to protect my tenants. I'm protecting my tenants because I need them to do good. Because when they do good and when they're successful, I'm doing good. So I don't need my tenants don't need to be protected. That is a movement. People need to be sure to understand that. They have no problem saying that. And I think if you look at their social media, they have no problem saying it either. And so what we saw during the pandemic while that was raised is that, and you're talking about the rental assistance doesn't help me to the extent that it helps me more than it helps my tenant. It helps both of us. When the rent is paid, I'm made whole and my tenant is okay. So the rent being paid helps both of us. It doesn't benefit or enrich me. And that's what the tenant says. That's what the tenant group you're talking about thinks, that the rental assistance is a bailout.
Now I can't figure out how to do it.
Uh-oh.
Well, why don't you call me back later?
Well, what was it you were going to say?
Oh, there she is. And so anyway, so there's no us versus them. I'm not in a fight with any tenants. That's not my business model. My business model is protect the tenant and keep the rent paid so they can have shelter and protection. And then I can have my revenue to run my business and pay the mortgage so I don't lose my property. So there's no us versus them. When I see people trying to make that distinction, I know the tenants that they have to do that for policy reasons. But please know that I'm not feuding with anybody, and our industry is not. We're just trying to solve problems. We're not trying to get into spats. And rental assistance is cumbersome. The process is cumbersome. Yes, there are millions of dollars, but try to get it. My husband was on the phone 2 or 3 times a week following up on applications. And like I said, it took us 3 months to catch one tenant up. That's ridiculous. The government should have had all hands on deck, get the process streamlined, make it easy, and get the money out there. That preserves our industry. It keeps me in business. It keeps my tenants with shelter, period. And most landlords are not the problem. We are the solution. We create housing. So I saw your note in chat there. And so let me run through a few more screens because I think I'm probably getting towards the end, but I wanted to share just a couple of things. We were talking about the tenant movement. And so here's some of the things they want. Their goal, the official organized tenant group, I said they have goals. My goal is everyday life, getting the tenant the rent paid and keeping them secure. Their goals are aspirational or beyond that. They have an ultimate goal of social housing and creating more government-owned housing across the country. Plain and simple, 12 million units is the goal. And the way they do that is what impacts the policy. So this is not negative towards anything or anyone, but just stating what the facts are. People haven't dug into it. I have, and I've had to because it's around me, it's my market. And so their goal is to disincentivize property ownership. They don't want me, Stacey, owning property. And so their goal is if everything is equal, it's kind of their tenants are, they're socialist in nature, and that everything should be equal. And so what they will do is someone who owns the property, you'll see this, they want to disincentivize. It's in writing in their manifesto online under the People's Action. It's there. It's no question. It's in black and white. It's not Stacey saying something negative. They want to disincentivize me so that I don't buy property. And that all that it is out there, the only option is government social housing. And we hear that conversation happening locally. And so instead of their goal is to make everyone equal, but they do it by bringing everyone down to the lowest level instead of lifting everyone up. I'd rather have people own their own homes instead of rent if they choose to, and buy properties and have something to pass along for generational wealth and legacy. So their goal is to disincentivize property ownership. They want me not to own real estate. So they don't want out-of-town investors. They want to make it unattractive. So tax them. They don't want someone to flip, which is something that my husband and I and other investors do. I'll go in and I'll buy a property that's sitting blighted and vacant, fix it up, and put it onto the market for sale, or I'll put renters in it. They don't want that because I will make a profit on it. They don't want me to have a profit. The names that we're called are profiteers, gentrifiers, opportunists, racists. We're called every name you can think of simply because we own property. And people need us in the business. And so anyway, these are some of the things that are impacting housing. It's these rights. And and people may say it's not in my neighborhood, it's across our country. And these groups are not necessarily local, cute little groups of people saying, hey, let's get together. It is an organized effort out of a central base in Chicago. So it's real. And they're across this country. And remembering when there are rights, the way they frame it, when there are rights for tenants, it's going to take away my right. So my right to buy a property, to flip it, to sell to a family that needs it because we have a housing shortage will be taken away if they have their way. And they want their social housing. This is something that we need to look at locally. Our city manager is buying a hotel, or is proposing that. And they want to call it social housing in Kansas City, but people need to know what it is. Social housing is government-owned housing for the most part. I'd rather have regular everyday landlords like me and my peers own it. But it's government owned housing. It can be free. What they want to do, and people need to hear this part because they don't hear this, is they want to use it to make reparations for things that have happened in the past around racial issues. So they want it in high income, primarily white areas, ideally the suburbs. And so they want to bring people in. This is in a sense, a punishment for the wrongs. And to me, that's wrong. Let's let the natural market create housing where it is. And then they want the ownership of social housing to be government owned. And that I shouldn't be able to own housing. And I think it's better with, if I have a tenant, and this happens all the time, they'll call my husband, we had a car repair. We're going to be late paying the rent. A couple of weeks late, my husband's like, okay, that's fine. Can you imagine government as landlord? And we've had that before. We've had that with Wayne Minor here, the projects here that didn't work out, they got imploded. We had that with Cabrini Green in Chicago, these horrible government run projects. I don't want them again. I want people to be able to own their own home or to have a choice about where they live. But that doesn't work in this model. And so we just have to be careful that we know what we're asking for and what we're looking for. And so, so they want out-of-state investors to be taxed, to make it so unattractive they won't want to do it. If you have a property that sits vacant, if I have, like, for example, during the pandemic, we bought a house, my husband and I, and we house several of our tenants were formerly homeless veterans. And we have a house, and so that's where our heart is. We have in my school district, we have homeless families. I'm part of an impact project there to eliminate homelessness. And I went out and found an investor that bought a couple of houses for families. My husband and I purchased one, but for a while during the pandemic, we had it sit vacant just because we were waiting and trying to find contractors. I would have been penalized for having that property sitting vacant. And so that's in their world, what they want, make it so hard and untenable to own properties that people won't invest. And I think that's wrong because, like I said, our investment is a way for us to create generational wealth for our nieces and nephews. And freedom from discrimination, they want housing to be a right. Anyone should be able to rent. If they come to me, if I have a vacant unit, they have an eviction record, they had 10 evictions and owed someone of the past 10 landlords thousands of dollars, I should have to rent to them. Someone that has a criminal record, let's say they just got out of jail and they were, let's say a pedophile, a child sexual abuser, and there's a school next to me, even though they should be conscious of that, I would have to rent to them regardless of criminal record. I can't do any kind of screening. They want anyone, if your credit is bad, no matter what, if you, or let's say you have income that's cash, let's say you're a drug dealer, you don't have your income coming through a regular method, I can't verify your income. In their ideal world, I must rent to whoever presents themselves to me, regardless of their qualifications, because housing is a right. And so that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make business sense, and it doesn't allow me to protect my community. And one of the things, this is like, there's a Bill of Rights, a tenant's Bill of Rights in Kansas City. Unfortunately for us, our mayor and council weren't interested in making it two-sided, a tenant and a housing provider Bill of Rights and responsibilities. The tenants were stronger in their argument and they won. So some of the things that we have to be careful they're looking for, I mentioned rent control, tenant first right of refusal, that a tenant's going to be able to tell me if and when I can sell the property they live in. Really? But that's out there. And then the renter has more rights for the most part than anyone else in our society. That's where that's leading. And so we just have to be careful in that what we ask for and what we allow to happen. We have to use common sense, and people are emotional and making decisions based on the arguments in front of them. And so anyway, that's my point. And then our realtors, and I had the opportunity to appear in, someone's saying the landlords have a Bill of Rights. No, that is not. As I mentioned, the lease was stepped on by the CDC, by the government when they said you can't enforce your lease. So no, the Bill of Rights, I think, is common amongst all of us, that the property that I own is my property to control. So that is out the window. Tenants don't need any more rights than a homeowner and then me, and then that I have. The Constitution guarantees private property rights, and those have been jeopardized by the CDC Eviction Moratorium stepping on our lease. And so the realtors, over 1.5 million strong, has stood up and said, we must talk about this, we must stop it, we must fight it, we must bring attention to it. And then they appointed me to be their spokesperson this summer when the eviction moratorium was put into place. And I was also I had a niece that, no, a cousin that called me, and she said, I'm looking through YouTube, and all of a sudden I see my cousin on there. And so what she saw was this on YouTube. And my fear is anything on YouTube is comments, the comment section. And so I'm worried. And you can see at the bottom left of the corner, there were over 400,000 views. And you see, and so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get into this, and people are just going to have a problem with me because so many people are anti-landlord because of this. And that wasn't the case. And so, oh, I don't want to play that. I don't want to play that, but I want you to see the next slide. And so I looked through the comments, and the comments were not horrible, thank goodness. And so many people understood logic that we should be paid for our property and our project. And so who would be motivated after hearing all of this? Who would raise their hand at a time when we are, like you said, Joe, in a housing crisis? We don't have enough houses. We don't have enough housing right now. And so what investor in their right mind is going to raise their hand and say, yes, I'm going to come into your market. I'm going to create more affordable housing. I have all of these rules and all of these governmental regulations. It's safer. My husband said, hey, we might have been better off in the stock market. So we're going to lose the private housing providers that we want in our marketplace. So all of these rules have that impact on our market. And so let me ask, Joe, how much longer do I have? I have a few more slides. Do I have time?
Well, we do. Yeah, we do need to take a quick break.
Okay.
But so if you can just wrap up real quick, it'd be fine.
Okay. And so I'll just say really quickly here some of my solutions. And I'll just be quick about this because, like I said, we are in business people. In order to survive and thrive in business, you have to come up with solutions. And so what we say is that there's rental assistance out there, and it's available for everybody. My organization, the KC Regional Housing Alliance, we actually did we didn't see anyone out there trying to tell tenants and housing providers where the money was. And keeping in mind, either the tenant or the housing provider can apply, and then the other one would too, because at least they recognize that we're in this together. It's no, I benefit, my tenant benefits, we both benefit when the rent's paid. So we did a few events where we housed them and where we went online and said, here's where the money is. Here's how you can find what's available, and here's who to talk to at the state level, the city level. No one else was doing that. There's no tenant group, no government group saying, here's how to connect to what money is available and what resources are available. But we did because we knew how important it was. And now other people are talking about it. We've had an affordable housing policy. Those who create housing like us, we do this every day. We're saying, here's what the city can do. And we're in the region, so it's not just Kansas City. They're just the ones that are pushing back the most. We're just saying, here's what we say would cause us to create more housing. So we have shared policies there. We've created rental assistance programs to keep people from being evicted. We've shared this with the city, and we can't get their attention. I guess if we're not in T-shirts and closing doors and protesting, they won't hear us. But we're trying to protect tenants with our policy. So we have an eviction prevention and a way to guarantee those high-risk renters. We created an eviction rehabilitation program for someone who's been evicted because of the pandemic. Not their fault. They lost their job. They got evicted, as a way for them to get that payment, that past due payment paid up. So we remove that barrier and help them to get housing or to be able to get a mortgage loan in the future. This screen, if someone wants to take a screenshot, or I can make this available, if you know someone that needs help, here are the resources that we send them to. Above all, 211 will get you there. It's 24/7, called the United Way, and we've worked with them on projects. Something else, the last thing I'll say is that one thing that we did, again, we made a call to action to the industry, to our housing providers. We know that we have people who are homeless that need help, people that we've learned that Afghan refugees are coming into our community, and other people who need help. I've asked the industry, let me know if you can help, if you have a property that you're willing to talk to about housing someone who is homeless with some wraparound services, if you'll help house an Afghan refugee or someone else who needs housing. So what I'm doing is gathering names, and I'm going to go to those organizations that work with the homeless and say, I have people that are willing to work with you. So we're being proactive. I've never seen that done before, but we're doing it in a major way. And so that's our president of our, the Realtor Association here locally, and me, president of our Housing Alliance. We've made a call to action to our industry. And I think that is, I don't want to play that. I think that's it.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you. We've been listening to Stacey Johnson Cosby, the realtor and the president of the Kansas City Regional Housing Alliance. Now, we need to take a break here real quick for our collection. We need your support to keep these compelling and provocative conversations going. So, and we will be information to how to How you can contribute to the forum will be put in the chat. I believe Renee will take care of that. And then we're going to go to question and answer. We're going to do that Zoom style, where if you just go down to the reactions part on your screen, you can click and raise your hand, and then I will be calling on you as you're queued up. And also, as a reminder, just remember, we don't want statements in there in the Q&A. We want to get to a question, and so we can keep the conversation going. And while we're getting people lined up, I will say that next week, Cheryl Kimmey will be here at the Kansas City Fringe Festival, and she will be talking about arts and the community and how they are interrelated and all those wonderful things. And all right, so. We have David. David is up first. Go ahead, David.
I only want to address one matter. I got into real estate and.
Hey, David, you muted yourself.
Started investments in my 20s, volunteer frequently, almost weekly in homeless matters, see the range of matters. I think there's a law of unintended consequences that's happening. During this pandemic, institutional investors that have a great deal of representation and lobby in government, I'm suggesting something bad is on the way, because the small business housing provider is getting squeezed out by voices that are not friendly either to the city, to the small real estate investor, or to the homeless person. Those institutional investors are powerful. They're just buying up America. They have such a large proportion of America already that I think wherever you stand on this issue, the big boogeyman is the institutional investor that almost nobody's addressing. And nobody wins in that. Not the city, not me as a business person, not the homeless person, not the family looking for affordable housing.
And I agree with you, David. People don't see that, but we see it in our industry. And someone said they get calls from investors all the time trying to buy their properties. That is happening across this country, and it's happening across our city. Those institutional investors have deep pockets, and they will come in and buy. They're even entering into I mentioned I'm a real estate agent, the single family market. They used to just buy apartment buildings, but now they're buying single family homes. So if a family wanted to buy a home, they're being outbid in multiple offers, outbid by an investor who can pay cash and who can close quickly. And those are the corporate investors. So what we need to do is keep people like me, the smaller investor, in business. And that means sometimes these horrible policies that are in place that are heavy-handed over regulations that run me out of business. We need to back off on those and do what we need to do to keep people in business that are the local housing providers. And it's just too easy for us to sell to the corporate investor, which we will if we must, because it's so untenable to stay in business locally with the policies that we see coming out of City Hall. So you have a good point, and the city needs to focus on us and to keep us stabilizing in business. I'd rather have a local hometown, someone said that in the notes, hometown housing provider than a corporate landlord.
And so, and I just have to put a question kind of related to that myself here, because Stacy, I think one of the things that you mentioned, I think people do work well with if they have a landlord that's right there, that's in their community, that's they're almost like their neighbor. But the concern is the imbalance, though, when you have a lot of the out-of-town investors and a lot of the management companies that are not as attentive, and you have the imbalance in the court situation where landlords are going to win 90-something% of the time on eviction cases, and then the imbalance and the consequences. I mean, I know that you've heard the term. A lot of people see that eviction has been described sometimes as even an act of violence. That the consequences of eviction are that harsh. So you mentioned that there's a lot of people that we're not as well protected from, and so how much of these protections need to be in considering those situations? Well,
we don't need protections any more than the laws that are currently existing. The violence is when you have a tenant group march onto a judge's block, holding a sign saying blood is on your hand, and walk up to his porch with his family inside and post a sign. That's violence. And when you have one of my peers had a tenant during the eviction moratorium, he could not evict them. And so the tenant has someone else staying in the property that didn't belong there. And he was over at the property meeting a contractor about something else. And this tenant's boyfriend or whoever it was came over and physically assaulted the landlord, the person who owned the property, because he knew that there was nothing he could do about it. And so the tenant's rights or go a bit too far. Regular rights are already there. If you hit someone, it's against the law, you get prosecuted, go to jail. And so we don't need any rights above and beyond that. Eviction is not violence. That rhetoric makes it seem like it's something other than what it is, and you kind of oversell it. And so what I say is that the evictions are not violence, they're unfortunate. And the way you prevent, like I said earlier, 95% of the evictions are for non-payment of rent. You mentioned landlords winning in court. And I'm going to say another statistic here really quickly. And we always hear there's like 90-something% of the landlords are represented by attorneys and tenants aren't. And then that's why they win. What I'll tell you is if a landlord has a business, an LLC, or if you're a business, you're mandated by law to hire an attorney. And so the only reason that number is so high is because you have to, by law. Now you have someone who owes you thousands of dollars for unpaid rent. Now you must pay more money to an attorney in order to get them out, to get someone into the property that's just as deserving of housing, but who can pay. And when you win a case, the reason that the rate is so high for winning is, keep in mind, if the case is for non-payment of rent, and you go before the judge says, did you pay your rent, tenant? If the answer is no, you will be evicted. So you are going to lose if you didn't abide by the contract. And so that is kind of a false argument a little bit, Joe, when people say that, because if you don't pay the rent, you will lose. And if 95% or so of the cases in the eviction court are for non-payment of rent, the judge can't find any other way. And so I just wanted to be clear that people kind of dig into that statistic when you see it. And we don't want to go to court because it costs us money. And as I mentioned to you, we will never collect that judgment. We'd rather have that tenant stay in the property and just get the rent paid than we're whole, they're whole, and they have shelter and we move on. No one wants an eviction. Nobody wins except the lawyers.
And how about the protections that might be needed when you consider that also that there's a lot of things that don't go to court. They don't make it to, there's not an actual eviction filed, but there's also concern about the power that landlord has to, because an eviction can be so devastating to somebody that just the threat of eviction, like there's ways to move tenants out without actually getting to court. And is that something that the landlords, how do you police each other, I guess?
Well, there are laws that police us. You can't do that. You can't, it's called constructive eviction. If, for example, if someone won't move and you go and you take the front door off or you disconnect the air or the furnace, that is a violation of the law. That landlord it can be penalized criminally. I mean, they can be penalized in court. And so it's already there. It's naturally there. And the good thing is that those cases are few and far between. More often than not, you're going to have a landlord that's going to wait the court system. It takes a long time to get evicted, to evict someone in normal circumstances. And in these days, it's even longer. And so we must, I have a landlord, a local landlord who had to, because she wasn't getting her rent payment, she had to pull her daughter out of college. She had to bring her home from Arizona out of college. She stopped paying her own student loans. She could not make her mortgage payments. She was on the phone all the time with her mortgage companies. And so the protections should have been there for us as well. And I would say that the natural protections for the tenants are there. Who protects those of us who own the property? The Constitution should have protected us with the private property rights, saying that this is my property that I can control in the way I want as long as I'm abiding by the laws. The government stepped in and changed that. And they told me I cannot enforce my contract. Who's protecting me? And so I have people amongst my peers that are out of business. They're going to file bankruptcy. They're going to be foreclosed on, because when the moratorium on mortgages, when that gets lifted, and these people owe thousands of dollars in past due mortgages, just like the tenants, they're not going to be able to pay it. Where are they getting the money to pay it? If their tenant did not pay the rent, they cannot pay their mortgage. And a lot of our housing providers borrowed and begged and did whatever they could do to pay the rent to house someone free of charge. We were mandated to provide shelter at our own expense for a neighbor. And that's absolutely not right. Where are my protections? We're talking about protections. A renter can go somewhere else and rent. What am I going to do with this big property, this property that I own and the debt that encumbers the property? I'm stuck. Who is protecting me? And along those lines, as a property owner in general, but then people who have mortgages, they were not protected as strongly. Their voices weren't heard. And so luckily there's going to be some money coming along soon. It's already been allocated. We just need to find out how it's going to get on the street to help those with mortgages who've worked hard to buy their homes and made down payments and investments in their properties. There will be money available to help them because many of them weren't able to pay their mortgages. And if they're in forbearance, again, that money is going to come due at once. And we're going to have foreclosures in our marketplace, bankruptcies, and people leaving the business because we didn't have protections, even though they were guaranteed in our Constitution as private property rights. Someone needs to look at all of the parties involved and not just the loudest voices. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, and it did in this case. They were very well organized as a movement, but their goal is bigger than protecting the tenant. Nobody's going to protect the tenant better than I will. I need my tenant protected so that I can stay in business, and I don't need outside advocates coming in to tell me how to take care of my customers. And so that's kind of a false notion that people need to kind of look at the next layer deeper.
Okay, Craig has a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Craig.
A couple of things. First of all, wasn't some of the stimulus money that was available, didn't some of that go to landlords specifically so that, to prevent the type of problems you're talking about and still protect the tenant from being out on the street? And the second thing, go ahead.
That's rental assistance. So rental assistance is out there, but it's cumbersome. Like I said, my husband and I waited 3 months to catch up one tenant, going back and forth with them about the application process. So we call that rental assistance, and it hasn't been easy for any of us. And it's a two-sided application. My tenant and I must apply together. And so if they have to fill their part out, I must fill mine out. And then if somebody's missing something, it goes back and forth. So government failed in making that easy to access for any of us.
All right. And the other thing too is the as far as criteria, don't the tenants have to meet some kind of criteria to show hardship before that prohibition against eviction would apply?
Well, they do, but and you're talking about there's a waiver, a form that they must, a declaratory form that they must sign to keep themselves from being evicted. But there are some judges who were not requiring or enforcing that, and that's across the country. And so a tenant couldn't just say, hey, I'm not paying my rent. I filled the form out saying that I've been impacted negatively, but not all of them did that. And some judges were kind of loose with that as well. And so, and no matter what, the end result was, Craig, that tenants who were not paying their rent during the pandemic, for the most part, were not evicted for non-payment of rent.
And then just one other thing too that I had, and you addressed it before a little bit. I'm the one that had the comment after I paid off my house. I'm getting like more than a dozen calls every single week for a year now from investors wanting to buy my property. How do I stop that?
You can't.
Because I'm on the do not call list and they keep calling anyway.
I wish I could find that. I'll tell you, almost every day my husband or I get calls. So imagine people with multiple properties. We're getting calls, text messages, postcards in the mail everywhere. They're trying to, that's just, investors have this, a program that they buy into, because our goal is to find properties, to buy them below market. We can fix them up and make a profit on them. Nothing wrong with that model. And one of the ways they do that is they reach people like you and catch somebody on a good day or a bad day. And they say, hey, you want to sell your house? And you say, yes. And then they buy it for under market value. So that's just a business. And those are programs out there and services that will send those postcards and make those calls. We have calls coming from people, I'm sure, in different countries. And so I don't know, the do not call list is good. For us, one thing that I always tell them, this is how I get them off the phone, is I'll say, I'm an investor. I'm looking to buy properties too. And they'll say, okay, bye. Because, they're trying to buy my property. It's like, nope, I'm an investor as well. And I know my husband always says, he'll say some high amount. Yeah, we'll sell it for $1 million or whatever. Right. But so that is just a part of our lives now. And we hate it too. And it's across the country, regardless of your house in the neighborhood, regardless of where it's paid off or not. They just get a block of numbers and they call.
Between those and the Medicare and the auto warranties, I spend probably 20 minutes a day, every day of my life, just telling all those callers to stop calling me, and they still keep calling.
Right. I understand. I'm getting
Thank you.
Yes. And then if I can say, our website, the KC Regional Housing Alliance, KCRegionalHousingAlliance.com or .org, either one will get you there. And what we're looking for, Joe, if it's okay if I say this, is if you're a housing provider and you're saying, hey, I'm willing to talk to someone to help with the homeless or the refugees or someone with an eviction on their record or whatever, there's surveys on our website. It's there. And so if anyone wants to help, we're trying to, as an industry, just step up and do something different and just kind of, take a leadership role and say, hey, we provide housing. Housing is needed for the homeless and for people with affordable. We're here and we want to, help out. And one negative thing that I must say is that our city of Kansas City, Missouri, isn't willing to invite us to the table for some reason. I had a meeting where the city manager specifically said, we're not looking, we were talking about homeless and the RFP that to try to house the homeless for that hotel deal came out of. And I'm in the room. He said, we do not want to go to the for-profit housing providers. It's like, are you serious? Why would you not want me there working public-private partnership together? I already house homeless. And so why wouldn't I want to house more homeless if given an opportunity? And we all provide housing. And the thing is, we do it on our own dime. We don't come to government for money. So they don't see us out there in the housing that we provide. They don't see us. They just look at nonprofits, but it's like, bring us all together to the table. Let us all figure out how to solve for the affordable housing crisis. We do it. We've been doing it for years. They need to have us at the table.
All right, well, thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Stacy Johnson Cosby.
Put up my information if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, just my contact information. If anyone wants to reach me, I'm on Twitter and my